So how long does it take for them to degrade?
It depends on the environment. I've had some pieces with me. They travel across the world whenever I have to also travel.
You took some with you, didn't you?
Yeah, I brought them with me so you can see a few. In a home composting system, it's between 2 and 6 weeks. In the winter, it can take up to 17 weeks. And in the summer, 2 to 3 weeks, all gone.
It feels like that's a lot faster than
than the
plastic.
regular plastic.
500 years. It's a little bit different.
Some efficiency gains made there.
Hi, and welcome back to Pop and Bubbles podcast. It's season 2, and again, I'm your host Lisa.
And I'm Stefan. And in season 2, we are talking about forever is a long time. A very broad topic, but we're trying to focus on circularity and our impact as humans on the world around us. And for our first episode of this season, we have 2 wonderful guests. We have Lori and we have Jesús. Hello. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Lori, could you give us a small introduction about yourself in a couple sentences?
Hello, everybody. My name's Lori Goff. I'm the founder and CEO of Outlander Materials, and it's a biotech and material science company based out of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And we work to take low-value side streams that come out of food production or agriculture, which could be beer brewing waste or fruit processing. And we take that, and through fermentation, we create new compounds. And from there, with material science, we turn these into non-plastic alternatives for single-use plastics, primarily used in packaging.
Cool. I love fermentation. You know, I ferment at home.
Yeah. We tried it.
And we have Jesús here. Am I saying that correctly, Jesús? It's correct.
Yeah, after many years, I'm used to all kind of pronunciation. So Jesús is the pronunciation in Spanish, but Jesus is fine. It's fine. So I'm Jesús Rosales. I come from Mexico, and currently I work as an assistant professor at Utrecht University, and my research topic is on circular economy.
Cool. Thank you for joining us. Lisa, you want to kick us off?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
We have many questions.
Yeah, we had a whole list. Should we start with Lori?
Yeah, let's start.
You already mentioned your company. Really curious. Can you tell us a little bit, maybe in easier words, because I'm not that familiar with...
Easier words of what we do?
Yeah.
So we...
Is there an easy way?
I thought I broke it down, but... Well, in food production, there is surprisingly a huge amount of waste. If you look at beer brewing, for example, for every liter of beer, on average, there's about 6 liters of wastewater that get wasted in that process, and they're filled with nutrients. But mostly it gets washed down the drain, or maybe in some instances sent to a biodigester where it's turned into energy. And so we looked at this waste, and well, it's a waste, obviously, to waste it. And coming from a biotech background, we thought we could use this as a feedstock. So to take this waste and using fermentation, we transform it into a new compound and something with higher value. Then we take this compound, we do some magic to it, and then we turn it into these types of films that are not plastic, are not made with petrochemicals, don't have any toxic additives, but are highly functional and can replace single-use plastics in packaging. And at the end of life, they're fully compostable in a home composting system or even out in the environment where a lot of packaging ends up. So we've designed it for the worst case scenario so that when it does enter the environment, there's no harm done.
So how long does it take for them to degrade?
It depends on the environment. I've had some pieces with me. They travel across the world whenever I have to also travel.
You took some with you, didn't you?
Yeah, I brought them with me so you can see a few. In a home composting system, it's between 2 and 6 weeks. In the winter, it can take up to 17 weeks, and in the summer, 2 to 3 weeks, all gone.
It feels like that's a lot faster than
than the
plastic.
regular plastic.
500 years. It's a little bit different.
Some efficiency gains made there.
Yeah, you can touch a few of the... Here you go.
Yeah, please.
I bought a new phone recently, and it was also like they put on the packaging like completely biodegradable or whatever. And it also came with, but I had like this type of plastic that was like, but it looks like plastic, it feels like plastic. Is it plastic?
It's a tricky game. You have this whole space of bioplastics, and bioplastics can be made from petrochemicals but degrade, or bio-based and not degrade, or bio-based and degrade. And then you have biodegradable and compostable and home compostable and what happens out in nature. So there's all these different categories, and it's very unclear, primarily for consumers. It's a tricky topic.
Well, as long as it keeps it dry, right, and it does what it does, I don't know, do people really care? As long as it fills the purpose?
I think that's part of the challenge. I think a lot of people do care and want to do the right thing, but it can't be too much of an inconvenience. It can't be too confusing. So I think there's still a lot of work to do on the clarity and alignment on labels, on certifications, what you should do at the end of life, and a more active education in daily life about the types of materials and what you can do at the end of life.
Cool. Jesús, have you ever heard of this concept? Like, you've been in the game, I think, for a long time. Is Utrecht University doing anything with biodegradable plastics, to your knowledge?
Not exactly your brand, but similar products, I'm aware of their existence, yes.
Cool. How does that work there? Is it like the university has like innovation labs or something like that? Or?
Where I work particularly, we do mostly desk research, so we do modeling and with different tools. We don't have a lab. I work in the Faculty of Geoscience, but my colleagues from chemistry, I know they are more involved in these experiments and developing this type of layers. Yes.
I'm really curious because I'm touching it. It's like how I get it's really chemical process of how to create it, but does it take a long time? So, for example, like I'm holding this packaging. How long would it take to create it in the lab?
From start to finish, if we got in some waste today, about 8 days.
Oh, okay.
Fermentation taking the most of that time.
That's quite cool.
Okay, how does what does the fermentation make? Like I make my own mead at home, so I like fermentation, and I've been reading up on like the chemistry behind fermentation. So what compounds does it create that you then use, or is
Offline,
that like?
I'm so happy to tell you, but right now because we're still in the process of the patent, it's not yet published.
Okay, cool. Now that's
It's a little too public.
Fermentation is what you need to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a strange question, I guess. It's funny, like I have a question because so we're all part of Enactus, or we're part of Enactus, and during my time at Enactus, I was focusing on a project that focused on recycling cigarette waste, especially the filters. And while researching that, I had a conversation with a chemist on like trying to extract the cellulose acetate from the cigarette filters. And they were like, okay, it's possible. You know, they had found a paper that described the process, and it's possible. But they were like, but on the industrial scale, it's like hard to do. So I presume that might be a challenge with this as well. Like, how has that been going from like a prototype scale to?
It's difficult and not difficult at the same time. Almost right after the concept was created, we thought about scalability. So a lot of problems with sustainable products is that they're not scalable and therefore are not sustainable in the end. So we always thought, how can this reach how can it fit within systems the most? How can it be of best use to clients? Trying to work out all of the pitfalls. And so the design of that was pretty simple because we did it early on. Funding that is a different story because it's a new material, there's a new process, and there's no existing infrastructure to snap into. So we have to build everything from scratch and figure it out on our own and try to find money to do that. So.
Interesting.
That's quite cool. I'm curious. So we also did a lot of research, like a tiny bit of research. And how is it, because also I'm right now having some projects in Enactus, how do you find funding for this kind of projects?
Most of it is from subsidies and grants. So when I started it, I quit my job and I had maybe 5,000 in savings. So that's what got it started. And then there was the City Lab grant 010 from the city of Rotterdam, which was the most amazing grant. I cannot recommend it enough. Anybody based in Rotterdam that has a cool idea, you should apply for this grant. It's phenomenal.
You're based in
Yes.
So they got us really started. Gave me space to rent in Blue City, to hire my first employee, to pay myself. It's phenomenal. And then there's also research subsidies in the Netherlands. There's a lot in the Netherlands to get you started on an idea.
Okay, that's quite cool.
Yeah. I mean, I read a little bit about your story that you just kind of like went for it. That seems very like scary. I don't know. Like I find it scary to go with my savings and just kind of start.
It was terrifying. Yeah.
Yeah.
It felt like stepping off a cliff. Because when I had the concept, I was working with a job. I didn't really enjoy that though. I wasn't with the university, but I knew this was something I wanted to do. And I had never started a company. I knew zero things about business, entrepreneurship. I just had this idea. So I quit the job, and it felt like stepping off of the cliff into an abyss. I felt like I was screaming the entire way. I had no idea what I was going to do. And fortunately, I was connected to Blue City, so it was like finding this little oasis to land in, and people who had done the same thing. So they help you stand up, dust you off a little bit, and they're like, yeah, here's water, here's a coconut. Let's get you started.
So Jesus, I saw you're working also on a lot of projects within the university. 4, if I'm correct? Or 3?
Living labs. It's not a lab in the traditional way.
Well, I saw it's just not only living labs. There's more stuff that you're working on, right? Is that correct?
Yes. Well, I've been working on the field for. I was making reckoning. How do you say? I was making accounts. No, I've been 30 years in the field. It's already quite a lot. But yes. But right now I don't do experiments as such. Right. They work in labs with this new concept called living labs, which is a way to organize working in different levels. It could be at a school, it could be at a city level, it could be at a company, and it's one of these buzzwords that is taking our environment nowadays, because it seems that everything is a living lab. But well, we are from the theoretical perspective, we are trying to define what that is, but also from the more practical approach, we try to implement that, especially in Utrecht University, right? But when it comes to circular economy, before I forget, I would like to say that I concur with what Lori just said, right? So it's the Netherlands, especially. I have witnessed several of my students that have gone into entrepreneurship. Some of them successful, as Lori. Some of them, unfortunately, not, right? But if you want a recommendation, one of my students has also a really nice company, and perhaps off the air, I can tell you. Perhaps you're interested because she works on circularity as well, also for women and for children. I think it's important to see that the empowerment of women. So I'm really happy. And she's a foreigner. She's from Costa Rica. So it also shows that it's not only if you are a Dutch, you have those disadvantages, but also I think it's only a matter of having a good idea and enthusiasm, a lot of persistence, I would say. But that I can give you that after that. But coming back to the lab, in circular economy, I don't do experiments because, well, we don't have that facilities. But what we do is modeling, conceptualizing the system, and do calculations for what it could happen, right? What we do is a lot of scenarios. I can imagine that Lori might be familiar with that. So now she has the process to manufacture this. But this was perhaps after several attempts, right? So what we do is try to...
Quite a few
some
attempts.
of them, right? So many, right? So what sometimes you try to do, you try to model and to devise, okay, we have all this range of strategies or potential strategies, what would happen, right? And that helps persons like Lori just to say, okay, we don't go to the extremes, but perhaps we choose 2 or 3 of the most promising. Still, we don't save the work of going through those different strategies, but that's what some of the tasks we do, right? Scenario analysis.
Cool. Do you have any more examples, concrete examples?
In terms of circular economy, yes, I have several, and I will give you 2. And you cut me, please, for the sake of time. But one of my PhD students, she's called Liz Suarez, and she works on social aspects of circular strategies. The circular economy has been focused mostly on the environmental aspect, which is totally fine, right? But we ask ourselves, well, it's fine, but what happens if a company adopts circular strategies? What happened in the social aspect? Does that have an effect, for example? Do the workers become better remunerated? So, I mean, it's fine for the environment, but in the end, we are persons working behind. And she developed, or together we developed, a framework to understand what happens if you follow different circular strategies, as we call it, right? So via a survey and some analysis behind it, you can see if the circular strategies, for example, they lead to some effects, or what kind of social effects you have after this. That is one example. The other one most focus on hardcore calculations. In the construction sector, where I am also involved with a former student, Marvin, what you did together is, well, you want to renovate houses, right, in the Netherlands, because several reasons. But there are several ways to renovate a building, right? You can have bio-based material, you can reuse materials, you can bring new materials, you can have a lot of things. And all that we call strategies and then we model what would happen if we rebuild this building, for example, only with new materials. What happens if we reuse materials from other buildings, right? What happens if we incorporate bio-based materials? And what we evaluate is, in that case, what was environmental consequences in terms of CO2 emissions and material use. So those two, in the social side and the natural side, but basically we try to think ahead what could happen, right?
I think this is a really phenomenal strategy because a lot of times you think something is the most sustainable and right one, and without modeling and seeing the consequences, you might be doing a lot more harm than good.
Do you do any modeling at Outlander
We are
Materials?
about to, yes. We just got an MIT R&D project approved with one of our favorite companies to improve the fermentation process and make it even more optimized and more scalable, ideally to make it more cost-effective in the future. And part of their USP is that they use AI modeling to help reduce the amount of experiments. If you say you would need 90,000 experiments, they can cut it down to 50, for example.
Interesting.
Cool. Wow. I have a question about the labs that you were talking about. So you did the modeling, and then what happens next? What's the... do you apply them? Do you send them somewhere? Do you share them with them? Like, what's the process?
Well, there are many possibilities, right? The scientific endeavor, what we produce, as we claim, is knowledge, right? And the knowledge is seen in what normally the scientific community knows as scientific papers. Unfortunately, those scientific papers we write in a really boring way. So it's only it's only a niche of persons that we're interested, and we become really excited about the new discoveries. But it's not only that. What can happen is that you can write what is called so-called white papers, and those white papers can be read by persons working in the industry, so with other sort of language, with a language that is adequate for these persons, and then they can see what they can do. For example, what Lori mentions, right? So she wants to do modeling, so I think she might not have the time for her company to read all the papers that are out there, but via some perhaps conferences or some meetings, so someone can say, you know, I'm working on the lab on improving the fermentation process, right? So that's another way. Also, we have some projects with companies where they are interested. So some of them say, you know, we want to improve our CSR strategy, our corporate sustainability strategy, and but then we would like to know what to do with the social aspect, for example, or we would like to do how to really implement the concept of circular economy. Then you work with companies, and directly you tailor-make some strategies and tell them, well, we suggest you do A, B, and C, but it still is a suggestion. You know? They need to implement and they need to see and to try it. So there are many possibilities. If I can summarize, one is to leave it at the pure practice of academia, which is produce knowledge, so other ones can take it, and we can teach it, of course, at school, and you get to know more strategies. The second one is to provide this knowledge to a wider audience, for example, and so entrepreneurs like Lori, or for example, I've been invited to primary schools, so I bring this concept of circular economy with other words, of course, I bring Lego blocks, for example, but I try to explain the same concept, so it's another way to provide knowledge, or specifically to companies where they use it for their practical application. So that's... Come to my lecture, all of you, please.
That would be amazing.
It's very interesting. Like before we started recording, you were already saying stuff that I had not even thought about. Like so, with the cigarette butts, another option, the way that even got started was we found a research paper from a professor in Australia that said we can use the waste, the filters in the production of bricks. And they were like, okay, so if you put it in the bricks, you can use the leftover cellulose and use it as an energy source, and then you reduce the amount of gas used to fire the bricks. Also, you would reduce the amount of virgin materials used in the bricks. And then they did like a whole test, like how much material can we actually fit in a brick before it starts to crumble when you try to build with it.
Yes.
It was like 1%. And then like it concluded with the very nice statement that if all bricks in the world would contain 1% cigarette butts, then there would be no more cigarette waste. And I thought it was really funny, and we found we found a company and that was interested in the idea, because they were telling us as well that they were looking for different materials that they could use in their bricks that were not virgin materials. But then I talked to like a lady who has like this in Amsterdam, this organization that they just pick up cigarette butts off the street just to clean up the street. And she asked me the question. She said, so if you put the cigarette butts in the bricks and then the bricks are done, what happens with them then? Like, does it then go like are the chemicals still in the bricks? Is it going to leach back into the earth eventually? And that's a very hard concept for me. So how do you, Lori? How do you account for that? That's like
With like our material, or
yeah, like I mean,
cigarette filters.
no. Like I mean, are there things that you encountered, like issues in terms of waste or whatever, that you did not see before you started working on Outlander Materials?
Issues with waste? Yeah, more like the collection and regulation around it. But as far as like materials leaching out, that's why we've put so much effort into the material that we make, because of in plastic production. And I'm not anti-plastic. Plastic has a lot of good uses, but I think packaging, it's time to switch. But as it breaks down, or as it's produced, it absorbs a lot of chemicals. And when it gets released into nature, it releases a lot of chemicals into nature. And so we've put a lot of effort into making sure that can never happen with our own material. Yeah. But there's problems across at every step.
Well, I mean, every step in the process produces something, right? Like carbon emissions or whatever. I mean, that's what I do at work, like, calculating the scope emissions of different companies. But so maybe a better question is, what would you define as being completely circular? How would you describe that? We're here for tricky questions, not for you.
Good that you ask it. So please, Lori.
And then I'm asking you, Jesús, don't worry.
I skip. No,
I think it's fluid. Sometimes circularity is wanting this closed loop. So we get asked, like, can you make a beer bottle from this, for example? We want to use the beer waste to make a beer bottle. And we don't really do that. We're making a film. So we imagine that circularity is not these different individual closed loops, but like paths like this, where the loop entwines, and one waste here goes into an entirely new industry, and then from there it bleeds off here and goes into this. And so that you have this, I don't know, like this vine system interconnecting, and there isn't really waste, ideally, at the end. There's a lot of waste now. But that one waste can go and become the feedstock for another spot. And you try to design out as much waste. Like, it's a lot of redesigning and rethinking.
But it seems very difficult. Like, if I'm thinking, like, you'd have to connect different maybe companies or industries and see how you can reuse stuff in different contexts. Seems like a very big challenge, let me put it that way.
I don't know. I think how to connect seems really easy for me. It's working out the logistics and the regulations around it that is tricky. How do you ship this waste here in a sustainable way? Where is the regulation where one thing is actually listed as waste and then you can't use it for a certain type of process? I think that's where most of the trouble for us lies.
What do you think, Jesús? You agree with this idea of an intertwining loops?
I concur to everything what Lori said, definitely. And I concur with you, this is a complex issue. But actually, that's the nice thing about it, right? This is what drives all of us that we're working on this endeavor, this complex, and we want to understand a tiny bit. Defining circularity, you can ask different persons and they could tell you different stories, but I think it boils down to what Lori mentioned, right? It's trying to close the loops. I have one colleague that he always asks, when we talk about circularity, he talks about the diameter of the circle, right? So what he claims with this, I mean, it's a funny question, but in the back is what he thinks is what the bigger the circle, perhaps it's not what we want. You would like to have this a closed circle, so everything keeps here in a small loop, right? So it's about closing loops, but I think we, especially the persons that are involved in natural science, we know that that is a good idea, it's a good aim, but that is physically impossible. At some point, this material will have some lack of properties and it cannot be used. But that doesn't discourage us, because the idea is, if it's not possible to get rid of the use of new materials, at least we can diminish them, right? So I totally concur with that. And the biggest challenge that I see for circular economy is that to imagine or to remember, for example, with the example you were giving about the cigarette, that the whole earth is at stake. So the system that we are talking about is not only this material is on the production of this, or the Netherlands where this is produced, or Europe, is the whole world. And imagine what the implications are of the production of any material for someone living, for example, in Fiji or in Vietnam, it's a huge endeavor. So all of us, we already have issues imagining how this process will be, just let alone what will be the impact in the world and also in society. And I think what I invite every time that I can, persons that are talking on this topic, is we should remember a couple of things. One is try to reflect or try to stop once in a while, not to lose focus. Because thinking about this packaging, I think is super cool. But I wonder, perhaps this has a rebound effect that persons can think, oh, we have the packaging, then manufacture more of the different gadgets that we have here. And that will lead more production of these materials with a nice packaging. I don't know the characteristics, but with a nice packaging, with let's assume that it's 100% degradable. But then the products that they are packing, you are asking for more
quite questionable,
so, and of course, that is always the game. You need to think and to really consider that option as well, that you are not inviting other persons to consume more, right? So that's one of the things that I always invite. So we need to stop often, just to check the waters and to see where we're going. And that doesn't mean that we need to have all the answers right now. For example, the person that asks you, hey, wait a minute, what happened if we use this cigarette filter? That's fine, and that is how science and I think business work. We should embrace uncertainty. That's the second advice, or the second. Who am I to advise? It's the second thought that I share with the audience, right? Besides stopping and reflecting, is embrace uncertainty, right? Because exactly that's what will drive in new solutions. Okay, we don't know now. It was a big mistake not thinking about what would happen with the filter cigarette in the brick. But now let's think, right? And let's make experiments. And we invite more people and we join, do experiments, and then we move. And the same with the company, right? I don't want to say that, producing a single-use packaging from biodegradable materials is a bad idea. No, just, okay, what do we do to not incentivize overconsumption, right? So that's also that. And that's I think, is a tension that exists in this field.
It's interesting you're saying that. Like, that reminds me back to our conversation with Steve Kennedy from the University of Rotterdam.
Mm-hmm.
He was talking about like where to make impact, and he was like, okay, every part of the chain has a place where you can zoom in to make the most impact on the rest of the chain. And because at Enactus we tend to work with a lot of waste products, I think that's always kind of what you see, right? Like, okay, this is left over, what can we do with it? And his whole thing was, why are you looking at what's left over? Why are you not looking at what is creating it in the first place?
Exactly. Yeah.
Lori, what do you think about that?
Completely agree. We tried to map out not only the process of production for like start to finish beer waste to this or other waste to this, but we expanded it. So what would happen when this material gets to different environments? So whether it's in Europe or in different systems, Africa, India, but also on the front side. So the different wastes, where are they coming from? What's being done with them now? Is there a better use? Could we keep it in the food chain, for example, first? We wanted to avoid interacting with the food chain. So if it's food quality, we don't want to work with it, only what you can't do. And then we thought about what if at some point this would take over some farmers who are currently producing something similar. And we wanted to see, okay, when we scale up, how do we include them rather than pushing them out of this industry altogether? So I fully agree, like thinking out how does not only your very specifics in work, but expanding it on all the different levels and seeing where can you potentially have a negative spot and how do you make that more inclusive for a future?
That's quite cool. I'm doing right now a course on social innovation in my university, and it's quite interesting they're talking about, because we had like recently one of the sessions on unintended consequences of your sustainable action, and we were talking about examples of like also some of my friends from Enactus were there, and we were talking about, okay, so like for example, what I was doing with my project was, okay, we take wasted fruits, vegetables, and then we produce the jams, which is quite cool. But then also the whole chain before of like, okay, why did those fruits even go to waste? Like, what happened there? And we go back and back and back. And at some point, as a student at least, I stop and I'm like, whoa, I wish I could do something, but I realistically cannot. I cannot go to the farmer and do something with it, at least from where I am right now. So I'm thinking, what can I as a student do to maybe try to make the world in general more circular? Is there anything I can do?
Oh, there's so much you could do. It's like an unending list. How do we even start?
Yeah, it's not a good excuse. There's so much you could do.
something small.
I think each small thing ends up in the next step, and the next step is much bigger. So starting out by thinking where your idea is and where you feel you can make impact, and then what are you missing? What do you need to make that next step? Who do you need to talk to? And then keep talking about that and keep gathering more and more of these resources. And there are a lot of places in the Netherlands to connect in the circular economy. I think there's Holland's circular hotspots, maybe. Blue City is a phenomenal space. That's where I've been connected, and I have the most connections there. The Versnellingshuis is really good. Google circularity in whatever city you're in or your school, and there are loads of resources to connect. And if there are, I think people are also really willing to help. So if you have an idea and you don't know what you don't know yet, but you know you want to do something, reaching out to specific entrepreneurs or people within circularity. I think professors are also really excited to talk about their work. Also generally want to help and connect and help people make the next steps.
That's quite cool. Talking about Blue City, I actually had recently a conversation with a brewery.
Fat and Lazy? Yeah.
Yeah, because one of our projects wants to take brewery waste and turn it into food, so into like granola bars and stuff. And what you mentioned before, like not working with like food sector, I now look into all the possible regulations and laws around it, and I do not want to look there again. It's really scary, especially for students. I think a lot of Enactus projects, we recently talked about it, ran into those kind of bottlenecks on like, you want to do something, but you don't know how, right?
Yeah. I guess there's a lot of red tape, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. I think it's funny because you were talking about the person you knew from Costa Rica. And this is also, I think, when we were at the Enactus World Cup earlier this year, it's funny to see that the best or the winning ideas come from not from Europe. They come from Africa and South America and places where they have such big issues and immediate consequences of climate change and whatever not. But also they don't have that much regulation. So you can kind of be like, what was it again? Like fish feed and stuff like that they were working on?
Yeah. I think Egypt, they had like the whole system of like you take the whole loop. They had one little product. I don't remember what it was, and then all the parts of the product were going in different fields.
One made biogas, and that biogas was used for something else, and then that produced something else, and that would make biogas again, and that would go back in.
So it's like a big closed loop.
Yeah, and I remember talking to someone. They were like, I wonder how they just can kind of like do that. Like, I mean, like work with like, I think here you'd have like need 1 million like certificates to be able to even touch that kind of stuff. But
it's like we were talking to the team from Kazakhstan, and they developed for their city the whole recycling system, just because it's not that developed in the country. And I just imagine if someone wanted to do something with recycling in the Netherlands, you run into bajillion regulations and other companies, like governmental organizations that do that. So it's kind of tricky here.
So what's going on in the circularity field, Jesús, specifically in the academic side of things? Like, what are people talking about currently?
Well, I think what you have in an endeavor, you try to define circularity. So some colleagues, and I think it's important to have a concrete definition. And I will come back to the concrete advices that you are looking for. But some persons try to define exactly what we are talking about, right? Because you risk that with these words like sustainability, sustainable development, resiliency, all the nice words that we hear, you get lost because at the end, they mean everything and nothing at the same time. So some colleagues are, and of course that makes life difficult for entrepreneurs, for other persons that, like Lori, they want to jump into that. The second one is how to measure that, how to assess. Okay, you might have a definition, but how do we really know that this is circular, for example? Mm-hmm. What are the measures, right? And how much circular is circular, right? Some persons talk about percentages, some persons talk about how many loops are closed. So you can have different metrics, but then I think it's also something important into the community that all of us were busy with trying to assess what does that mean, so in practice, right? So, or how to assess, how do you know you are circular, for example, right? So how can you tell, or sustainable for any reason, right? And the third one is try to incorporate circularity in the discourse of sustainable development. Personally, what I think is that circularity should be a means to an end. So the end, that's my personal opinion, shouldn't be that all of us, we should be circular, right? Circularity, perhaps, in some aspects, could endanger the sustainability of a region. Just the example I was giving you, right? If by an unintended effect, so we try to do something circular, but then we bring some use of materials or energy in other part. So at the end, we should be concerned with sustainability or being sustainable, right? And if you ask yourself, well, what does that mean? At least we have a big framework for the world, which are the Sustainable Development Goals. And some of the goals even contradict each other, or the indicators, but at least there is a framework. And then, right? What you can do as a person, I would say, is there is this framework that is called the R framework that defines different circular strategies. You have a lot of them. You have from 3 R's to 5, from 7, from 10. That's, you don't have to learn it by heart. But all of the frameworks, they concur that the first one is refuse. And basically that means, do I need to consume this? And I think a lot of discussions on circularity are what you mentioned and what the colleague that you talked to the last time, he was mentioning or she was mentioning. We talk about the end, waste. But in the beginning, do we really need more glasses? Do I need a new T-shirt? Do I need... And that, once again, is an invitation to reflect in everything we do, right? I always look at myself. And for example, I was telling you, I host a radio show, which is really nice. It brings me a lot of joy. But then when I did a small study with some students, the implications of surfing on the internet or broadcasting 1 hour, I am like, I think I'm doing more bad than good, if you put it like this, right? Oh, so what it helps... no, but I mean, that's the invitation for everyone to really, if you really want to do something, the first step is to step back from what you are doing, and as much as possible, every hour, every day, ask yourself, what I'm doing this, right? And with a good definition of what you're doing, so I just discussed this with some students, I say, I feel guilty because be at the servers, and then I bought a microphone, of course, right? And I need to have a nice computer, and the sound system, and the mics, a lot of materials, right? So what do? I'm doing, in the material aspect, more bad than good. And they told me, Jesus, but remember, you have always told us that social sustainability is also important. So do a show of good quality that transmits some knowledge, that brings joy to people, and hopefully, and that is the uncertainty part, and I cross my fingers, that levels up, or that adds more, right? So that's what you can do. So think at every step, think if you need something, right? And if the answer is yes, I need it, think if you need it new. Right? And if you think I need it new, then use it as efficient as possible, right? You can do it right now when you leave the studio, and there is no reason to say, I don't know what to do about saving the world, I would say.
It's all about balance.
Yeah. Lori, what do you think? Like, do you agree? Have you ever heard of the R framework?
Yeah. Okay. It's pretty standard, I think, at this point.
Pretty standard. Okay, it's for me the first time. I had no clue.
Oh.
Same.
Yeah.
It's hard to improve upon this. I mean, Jesus touches on so much of it. Also, what's really common in the conversations on the circular side from businesses and startups. I think an area that we see is definitely within the social sustainability. It's not really talked about that much in the circular economy. It mostly focuses on the means of production and consumption, and sometimes too narrowly. So there's sometimes too much focus on the reduction of carbon dioxide, but not looking on all the other parts of what your process does or doesn't do for the world. You still get a push to produce as much sustainable product as possible, which is, not making so much sense. But something that a lot of the startups are focusing on is not only trying to make a company that is making good products or making good services, but making a good company for the people themselves. The circular products are typically more expensive, and largely because we need more labor. But labor is very expensive. You have higher taxes on labor. And so we're kind of saying, are there ways to shift the taxes away from labor and more onto product side? So then you can hire more people, pay them better wages, and maybe suggest that consumption can reduce a little bit because the materials are more expensive. And how to make the working environment good. We don't only want to give better salaries, but we want to have places where you don't feel stressed out. And that's often the case in sustainable startups. You're stressed because you're trying to do everything and create it new, but your life sucks. Like, that's not sustainable either. If you
get a burnout, for example, I think we don't want to lose bright persons like Lori that are trying to fix solutions for a burnout. No, it's serious, right? I mean, that will be a waste, totally a waste of resources, right? So you need to do this, of course.
Interesting. I mean, on that topic, like, I mean, I assume that producing this is more expensive than producing traditional plastic, given all the infrastructure that exists to create plastics. Like, sometimes I feel like I see videos of like, I try to live sustainable. Like, you know, I try my best. Like, I think it's a personal endeavor. I do think that it's also a company endeavor you should really push companies to be more sustainable, because they just have a lot of impact, right? I mean,
yes, I do agree, but those companies are not robots, right? This discussion I have it often, and I totally concur, right? I'm not saying we should push the individual and blame and say, you know, you, Jesus, Lori, Stefan. No. What I'm saying is that if we transmit this mindset, eventually all of us, we will be ending up with Lori, but with a new mindset, right? So Lori's already telling us, I mean, I don't want to have a burnout. I have other priorities in life. And that's what you would like to achieve, but that you achieve it with persons working in the company, right? So nowadays, it feels like taxes, right? You pay the taxes, and sometimes the government says, and we will increase the taxes. I say, yeah, but I already pay mine. Tell those that don't pay, could be big companies or my neighbor that I know that he or she doesn't pay, tell them to pay, right? But that is not the case. So the case that taxes are important for several issues, but in the same case, we cannot, because we live in this system and eventually here in the podcast, right? So if you have this mindset of becoming sustainable, my expectation will be that you will somehow transmit that. And the podcast, let's say,
I hope.
Yeah.
No,
That's the goal.
That's what we have, the hope.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we tend to come back to the previous model, right? That is okay, just use materials, just buy things. So sorry for the interruption, but it was my point. So yes, I totally agree. We need to push companies as a society, but also the individuals that work for a company. I think it will be easier, or at least I hope, if they also have this chip or this understanding, they will also ask their company to improve. Because if the individual that goes to work do not care, so that's my
well,
point.
yeah, because like, yeah, I think I live in a pretty sustainable bubble, I hope, and I see a lot of change, and, you know, but like when you then look outside of Europe, I see sometimes videos of like rivers full of trash, and also in the US, you know, like, oh, I got a whole haul of a Shein, you know, like a million items. Like, it feels very hopeless or whatever. Like, what's it like trying to push a sustainable alternative to plastics in a world that's dominated by cheap plastic?
It comes and goes in waves. Sometimes it's fun and it's exciting, like a challenge, and it's engaging, and sometimes it feels completely defeated. The thing is, no matter what, barring like maybe 20 people in the world, everyone else is trying to do right with their life. They want to do something good. And even in the world that's using plastics, most people want to switch towards something better. They want their plastic to be more sustainable, or they want to not use plastic. But it's a systemic problem. It's ingrained across every industry in the world, and they can only change so much. So it's all these really small steps. And I think the government needs to take a larger role in it, because companies have to exist. Like, they need to still make the profit. That's the point. People still have to buy the products. And it only really works when all three things are happening together. So I look at it more often as just trying to have an engaging conversation with as many of the players as I can. And it doesn't feel like a mountain, I guess. Like a dance instead.
Like a hill?
Like a dance,
Oh, like a
like
dance,
you change
okay,
dancing
yeah.
partners, and
Okay.
sometimes it fits better and sometimes it doesn't. But
Interesting. Lisa, I think you were looking at something with plastic waste, right?
Oh yeah, I also coming back to my studies. I'm writing a paper right now about plastic recycling industry. So it was quite interesting because as from a point of a student, I look at it as like, okay, I can use like reusable bottle. I can so consume as like the least amount of plastic I can, right? But then I started reading into papers and about how much waste, first of all, exists that for some reason, I never thought about it. There is a lot of waste, but I never thought how much actually. And then I looked into the market of recycling in general. And we already discussed with Stephen before. So Asia Pacific region is like in general the most polluted with plastic, but also they have the highest percentage of like patents on recycling technology, which is quite interesting to me. And then I started looking more into, okay, what other alternatives are there? And from at least what I see, companies are not interested in offering the alternative. Not at all. So especially those that exist, they more tend to, okay, this is still our plastic, but just like 15% more sustainable, which is funny. It's still more sustainable, but it's still the same plastic. So I was wondering, do you think there is a future in just not having that basic plastic that we have right now and just having only like sustainable materials, so maybe biodegradable plastic all over the field?
I absolutely think it's a future, but it's going to be a long way off. There are so many parts that you touched on, and I can dive into deep on why only these little bits are happening at the time. But we're going to be hours in here. I would love to.
We always tell people we can always do a second part.
There's so much. But why Asia has such a large amount of plastic waste and the most recycling technologies is because we've been shipping all of our plastic there. In the US and Europe, we really only recycle high-density PET and PP mostly, and a handful of other things, but it's mostly shipped to them. So they're stuck with the entire world's plastic waste and trying to handle that at the same time. And then they've had to start rejecting it, which now makes Europe and the US rethink some of the strategies. And the company's only making it 15% better. It sounds small, but it's actually a huge step on their part because everything is so integrated and they still need to, whatever their product is, get it to you for whatever reason. And the footprint of the thing that's inside that packaging is usually so much higher than the packaging itself. So if they make it a little bit thinner, it's still huge. We can do much better in the future, but that's still something. So I do want to acknowledge that the plastic industry and companies have been trying to make a lot of innovative steps to make things more sustainable. But it's not an overnight switch. And it takes all these different partners to try and make something like that happen. But we're also, like, petrochemicals is not an unlimited resource. At some point we will run out, or the planet will be too toxic for us to live. And so we need to switch to something new. And finally, the technology is here. Money is available. It's sitting in this cloud. It's not getting to the people who need it at the moment to make those technologies happen, but it's there. And we can make this conscious switch. But it will take time to bring everything into place, to transition.
From a business perspective, what do you think that for the companies who are purchasing this plastic to use in their packaging or whatever, what do you think for them is the biggest factor that will influence if they make the switch or not? Is it costs?
It is a mixture of cost and volume and machinability. So it still has to be affordable. And right now, all of the alternatives are too much. And that's mostly because plastic has been around for, I don't know, I think the first one was invented in the 1860s or so. It's been mass-produced since the 1950s and 60s, and it's been integrated into everything. So it's very cheap. It's very easy. So they operate on these huge rolls, and packaging for the big companies just going and going and going. To stop that, it takes a lot of money, time, and people. So to even do a test with a new material, you've got to guarantee that your material can run on their systems, won't clog it up, will fit, will be good for their products, and you have to guarantee I can provide X amount of volumes for so many years, so that switches makes sense for them to do business-wise. And most of the materials are not at that volume yet. And to get to that volume, you also need to make sure that your materials are machinable. A lot of them still have troubles because the machines were meant with paper and plastic, and we're creating new materials that don't fit in this framework yet. So we need access to those systems, which can't stop that often, to prove that we can make it, so that we can get funded to make bigger volumes so that they can trial it.
Okay, but at least sounds like that's just a matter of time,
Yeah.
right? And some early adopters and some people that believe,
Yeah.
and maybe some nudges from the government and regulation to try it out, right? I mean,
Sounds like a plan. Like some decent, but a plan.
I just realized that Jesús, like we asked Lori about her definition of circularity, and you just told me that you guys were researching on what is circularity. So could you please give your definition as to what you personally think?
Yeah, it should be around 160 and counting, I think so, if you look around. For me, circular economy is not about, well, for me, it's a way to see and understand the world, and the economy in this case. And there is one part of the name that I dislike, so in the name of circular economy, which is the economy. I think everyone agrees on the material, society part, but while listening to Lori, still the profit is there. And I remember one small anecdote. I was at, when I used to work for the industry, because my career is not only academics, but it's only in the industry. I was at a conference, and in my role of, what was I? Production manager, production manager or something, right? It would be a translation to English. And we were discussing, and revenue was there, and I, being a young general production manager, I raised my hand and say, guys, I have a small question, right? Because as a production manager, you're responsible for producing, for the safety, and of course, costs come into game. And the persons on the meeting wanted, let's say, 10% of revenue, whatever the number, right? That's irrelevant right now. And I said, guys, and the revenue was for them, of course, for the shareholders, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, what would happen if you don't get 10, but you get 7 or 8 or 6, and the rest you give to the company, invest, and all the things that you are asking.
That was your last day, right there.
Exactly. That was my last year. And then silence, right? Time passed by, and as an academic, I was at another conference, but on water, in the water sector, circular water use. Companies there, but the scientists there. And the term economy came again, and I said, perhaps then I was naive. I'm still stupid, but perhaps a little less naive. So I will ask the same question, right? Because there are brilliant people there. Guys, how much do we want to grow in this sector? And then I ask you the same question also to Lori. A company, what is the purpose of a company? To grow in the current way, right? Until when? You ask any of my economist colleagues, and they say, well, the sky is the limit, right? So we want to make everything circular, but our mindset. And that's why I come to the individual, right? Because those persons that run the company, if we're still thinking that we try to make a circular system on the earth, but it's still skyrocketing my profits, I think we are doomed with more intentions. Because we are looking at having the more advantage, right? And that tells me that all over the years, perhaps in these 30 years I have of experience on the field, not much has changed, unfortunately. Little by little I see new persons that they come with new ideas. But for me, circular economy is more what they call it, sophisticated, a paradigm shift. So it's a change here. Mm-hmm. Because the techniques are there, right? But if you don't have it here, if you are still thinking, I want my benefits, so I don't see the circularity there, because the line at some point will extinguish, right? Because the benefits will stay at some part of the circle. So the materials, we want the materials to flow circular, but the benefits, we don't want them really to be circular and to be spread out along the value chain of the world in the same way. So for me, for Jesús, circular economy is a new way to look at how we do things.
It's bigger than just how you make loops and whatever not.
It's way bigger than that.
Just the way of thinking.
Exactly.
I fully agree. Like what I liked about Enactus and the idea that they pitched to us when we join, and is that you create a sustainable business, but that it can make profit as well. Because I agree with you, Lori. Like you need profit to keep operating. Yeah. And that's what you see. You see people that come up with social enterprises that are like not profit focusing, but like that's very risky. If you lose like your little bit of income, then like you're done. So that's why I'm a big fan of the I totally agree with you say. I would give the 7% rather than the 10%, right? For sure. But I do think that it's important to still have that 7% so you can keep going. Lori, what do you think about this idea? Are you on Jesús's paradigm or?
In between. I think I'm both an optimist and a realist at the same time. So to have a business, you want to be able to do good. You need money to do good. So you have to make a profit so that you can reinvest it, or that you can grow and do more activities. It's not always about growth to the extent, but growth to what is needed to be able to function in the right way.
Well, I think what your product now needs is growth, right? To get out there, right, and replace single-use plastics.
If I think that we should remember that money, as circular economy, should be a means. In the end, money, what it is a way to exchange products, right? Mm-hmm. Because we were growing, and I make glasses, you make microphones, and we change. And then because it was difficult to see how many microphones per glass or per jacket, we invented money, right? So I think that's the essence, right? Because Lori mentioned something that I have heard several times, and it's just a thought I have, and I challenge all of you that are listening to us and watching us. Do we really need to have money? I remember a season of the Simpsons. You might know this cartoon, right? I hope it's not that old-fashioned. And in one of the episodes, suddenly, the TV didn't work, right? So, and Springfield, they show in the episode, was focused on TV shows and the artists and all what it brings the TV, right? I'm not putting a label good or bad, all what it brings. But suddenly, TV, for a reason, I think they didn't have electricity, something happened. And what they show is that suddenly kids went out to play, the parents start to talk to each other, they wanted to hang around with families. So when I look at that episode, I said, do we need what we have, right? So if you ask me, how do I envision the society of the future? I don't know. I spend my time on that, and I unfortunately don't have an answer, sorry. But what I question myself is if it indeed saying that we need money, or can we live different? That's my question, right? Perhaps the answer is no, and it's fine, but do we need a society that is exactly like this right now, where money is king, right? Because but then the question is, okay, Jesus, how do I arrange it? And unfortunately, I don't have a question, right? Mm-hmm. Some really sophisticated scholars, they argue, well, perhaps with these suggestions of sustainability and circular economy, you are proposing, guys, that we come back to the Middle Ages, right? And then we trade and we are small here.
Yeah, chickens for microphones.
Exactly, right? Well, I don't know if that's the case. I hope not, because I think all of us, we enjoy knowing what happens in Vietnam, in Korea, in Chile, and then some of us would like to travel. Well, for any reason, we live in a country that is not our mother country. But I don't think we should come back to those eras where we were limited and for one area. But I think that it's possible that we rethink the society we want and the role that money has, right? Because when I listen to those claims, that I understand where they come. I mean, I worked like 10 years on the industry, and actually I need also to put bread on the table, right? It's not that I live from air, right? But this, is that the way we need to conceptualize? And just to close my comment, I told you in this R ladder, the first or the upper R is refuse, but the second one R, the R1 is rethink. And that means not only rethink the chemical process, as Lori is doing rightly with her product, right, the way we do things, but also rethink the way we live. And that's another thing that I was inviting you, right? That's what we can do, right? So how can we live with the same quality of life, but without making something specifically as the center of our life? So rethink is the second R and could help us there.
I really wanted to be one of the takeaways of the episode of just rethink.
Refuse, rethink.
Yeah, just stop for a second.
What are the other R's?
I don't know them by heart.
Reduce, refurbish. Redesign, refurbish, remanufacture, recycle.
Recycle, just for the sake, is really at the lowest level, at the very bottom, right? So try to reuse, try to redesign. For example, one really nice exercise, I don't know if you have done it, Lori, because now in the business environment it's really popular, at least I did it, and I think it's still one thing. They tell you, you only have, let's say, a bill of 50 euros, 100 euros, right? It's the only thing you have. What can you do with it? And when they put you in that situation, there are a lot of nice ideas. And I know some companies that I have been born with that. If I would have only this, well, I could buy a glass and use it as a weapon, for example, right? Or I could buy a glass and serve water myself. A lot of ideas come, right? I think that you rethink the stuff. So I think it's a good invitation and a good exercise, not only in terms of sustainability, but when we are in a challenging situation in our personal life, I think you should take a step back, rethink what you could do.
I actually had that conversation last
see?
week, but it was different because it was talking about reducing carbon emissions, and it was like, if you inventorize all the carbon emissions of a company, and you only have 1 week to reduce something, what are you going to focus on? Because you can't reduce it all.
Oh, exactly.
You want to reduce it all, but you can't. So, and I thought that was quite an interesting way of thinking about it. Because my question then defaults like, yeah, but like if you're going to cut corners, then you're not going to achieve the full result. I don't know exactly how I feel about that yet.
But I think also sustainability is a humble exercise of circular economy, at least for me, and this personal. When I graduated as a chemical engineer, I really thought I'm the man. Then when I was working, I understood, okay.
We have a mug for this.
Yeah.
I am the boss.
No, I was the man. No? But then I thought, no, perhaps I need a bit more knowledge. So I did a master in energy and environmental science. And then I thought, now I am the man. But then I understood, okay, I'm lacking the social part. And then I did a PhD on economy, but not in the hardcore economy, but more in the knowledge management, so in the soft side of the economy, if you want to call it like this. So to get acquainted with how we think, how we process thoughts, right? And then when I got my PhD, then I thought, yeah, I am the man, right? So totally. And if I look at the world in the way it is, I actually ask you for forgiveness because I failed, but big time, right? So I was not the man. I will not be it. And that has been a humble journey because you realize we need everyone. We need historians. We need business entrepreneurs. We need kids. We need all persons, whatever it all is. We need socialists. We need chemists. We need physicists, mathematicians. It's a humble exercise because then you think, yes, everyone should be on board, right? And it was a humble exercise because who I was, how stubborn I was, how stupid I was, thinking that I could bring some benefit to the whole world, right? So. Yes, we become frustrated and we think, yes, it's just a corner, but just remember that it's not only our endeavor. Hopefully other persons will come to cut other corners and then together, all of us, we will achieve
the whole pie.
Exactly, yes.
That's interesting. And I think a lot of these innovative products come from more hardcore science backgrounds, like biochemistry and stuff like that. But one of the things that I've encountered throughout the years, talking to people that are doing mathematics, chemistry, geology, whatever, is that then there's this business aspect which they don't know anything about, and then it's like I have a good idea, I could change the world, but I have no clue how to start. So I don't know if that was you.
It absolutely was.
And so how did I go? Could you maybe share a little bit about your journey,
From my journey, I can start way back. When I was a kid, there was this cartoon called Captain Planet. It's a superhero that fights pollution. Yeah, exactly. And at the end of every episode, what he does is there's 5 kids and they get these magic rings from Mother Earth, and then they go around the world fighting pollution. And when it's too big for them, they combine their powers, and Captain Planet shows up and he fixes the problem and he plants trees and he puts the bad guys away. And then at the end of the episode, he would talk to you about what happened, why was this wrong, and what could we do as a whole, but also what you as an individual could do. So that really stuck with me, that maybe I'm not the one causing the problem, but if I don't do anything to solve it, I'm still responsible. And so I held on to that for years. And later on, I found out about this NASA project. It was called Omega Bags, where they were growing algae on wastewater and turning that into biodiesel. And I was in love. I was like, this is it. This is what I'm going to be able to do. So I studied biotech so that I would have the background knowledge to work in these types of projects. Then made biodiesel from used cooking oil. landed here, started brewing beer as a hobby, learned about beer, quit my job, knew nothing about business whatsoever. I just knew something was possible, and I would find out along the way. Embracing uncertainty is one of my go-to advices, so love it. But it was really, really hard. I didn't know anything. I had no money. I ate free food at events. Blue City would help me. When I didn't know what to do, I would go to someone and they would provide something. But eventually it got so stressful that I came really close to a burnout, like a cartoon, and they come down and then they almost hit the ground and there's like this cartoon dust version of them. I was that close. So I joined an online meditation course. And that has been phenomenal in the rest of my journey. So I cannot recommend that enough. But in that online course, I met a guy who was coming from the financial world, wanted to leave it, and then he joined me. So I found the person who could help me learn business. And we have since built a team focusing on what we can bring, like our strengths, and bringing together, and when we lean on each other and just build from there. So for anyone who wants to start a company, hopefully a sustainable one, you don't have to know it all in the start. It's actually better if you don't, because then you can build it from scratch. You can rethink what you don't like and just decide the future you want to have.
Amazing.
Oh, that's such a good
And honestly,
point.
we have to start wrapping up here. But this is we were at the Enactus World Cup asking people these questions as well, and that's always what came back. Like, have good partners, have people that complement you in skills that you do not have, and that's how you make stuff happen, right?
So crucial. Yeah. Cannot recommend it enough.
Really cool. All right, shall we?
Yeah.
Shall we ask? Maybe we should ask the guests. What would you give as advice to like the people listening, people that are now sitting at home that maybe don't have the business skills, maybe they don't see the way in the circular way yet. Like what can people do to take one step forward tomorrow to make a better world?
That is for you.
No, Jesús, I want you to go first this time.
I would say, well, not rewind. How you say now in the technological times? Listen to the podcast again and continue listening to this podcast and watching
Yes,
the podcast.
please.
I would say, because I think several ideas that we mentioned is the intrinsic part is we want to share this. That will be the advice, right? As I told you some minutes ago, I don't consider myself someone with authority to give an advice, right? As Lori, I have enjoyed my journey. And I think that I have learned is just embrace uncertainty and take a step back. I also had a company once. I was an entrepreneur as well. I was younger. Together with a colleague, we also saw that in Mexico, that the natural gas was polluting a lot and was also expensive. And then because we were chemical engineers, we developed the use of a solvent to provide to a certain industry there. And to our surprise, we were successful. Right? And opposite to Lori, what happened there is that there were no meditation course, unfortunately. And we didn't find, together with my really good friend Edgar, we didn't find the financial person that could help us, right? And we were so proud, so stupid, because we thought that with the only fact of being chemical engineers, we will make, as I told you, we really thought we were the man. And I think what I learned is that every single bachelor, even if you have not studied, if you stop at the school for whatever reason, every single profession has something to give in this whole intertwine. So I would say embrace uncertainty. I have no advice, but just listen to the podcast. And if you find something that distracts you, just take it and try to practice it. I think just use it with that. And keep listening to the podcast, I would say.
I love the promotion. That's amazing.
That's what we would say.
Thank you.
And Laura, what's your advice?
It's tough. Jesus has stolen mine, so it's...
Embrace uncertainty.
Usually the standard line is like, embrace the suck. Like, entrepreneurship is so hard. It's a challenge one day after another, both on the business side and economic side, and you personally, like, you're challenged with who you are and what you want to do. So I usually say it's so terrible that once you like acknowledge it and even embrace it, that it's going to be terrible, then you start to have a lot of fun. You know, it's like if you're going to play football in the rain, you know it's going to be terrible and cold and wet and muddy, but then it's super fun and it makes an even better story. But since he's taken that one, I think the other advice, something that has helped me a lot is indeed to take the step back and think, where do I actually want to be, like, as a person? What am I drawn to the most? And even if I don't have the business skills or the network or anything, you can bring something to that. Your passion alone connects the right people. It brings it in and you can take the step forward. But it's got to be the one that you genuinely want to take and not what you think you want to do.
That's great.
Amazing. I think there's also a lot of resources, like-minded people, right? It's maybe good to seek those out.
Yeah, I would say, thinking aloud, just one word, if I could say that, or two words: have confidence. It could be in yourself, in someone that you met. I mean, if you're already listening to this podcast or watching, is that you already have what it takes to make those steps. So just have confidence. There's no wrong. Just try it. Have confidence. That will be.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks to you.
Thank you so
Lori.
much for joining us. It was Popping Bubbles Podcast.
Season 2.
Episode 1.
Episode 1. Forever's a long time. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to
all the technical team that are here. Thank you to them.
And everyone that's on the podcast team. So we'll be with you next time. And this was the Popping Bubbles podcast. I'm Stefan.
I'm Lisa. Thank you for watching.
Jesús and Lori. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.